Okay, so in this way you can, this was the last question which we were discussing. So here you see the triangle function that you are trying to represent is represented in this format. So let us see how it is working. So let's focus on the first part. So we have this as r of t plus 1. So this r of t plus 1 can be, it can be represented like this. Here you see this will be r of t plus 1. And in r of t plus 1, if you have this as your ramp function, so now what we are doing? We are doing minus 2rt. So when we are doing a minus 2rt, what is rt? Rt will be like this, and the minus of that will be this, and the slope of this is minus 2. Earlier the slope was 1 here. So if the slope of this is minus 2 and then you have a 1 slope earlier, so this is our new version. So if you see now, let me draw it again. The first r of t plus 1 is like this. This is your first r of t plus 1. So now what you have to do is you have to make a triangle like this, right? So to make a triangle like this, you have to make this slope go down. You have to make this slope go down to a slope of minus 1. But here you have a slope of 1. So how you can make it? You can make it by, first of all, decreasing this slope of 1 to 0 first. So that can be done if you subtract this line, the pink line over here, with the green line RT. So if you have one RT, then what will happen? If you have one RT like this, which is minus RT rather, so what will happen is this plus 1 and minus 1 will cancel out. So if this plus 1 and minus 1 will cancel out, what will happen is the new signal that will come up will be like this, because you have subtracted one RT from the R of t plus 1. So the slopes cancel out and you will get a horizontal line. And now again you want to do one more subtraction in order to make this slope negative one. So in order to do that, what you will do is you will again subtract one RT. If you again subtract one RT, so once you have this sky blue, this blue line, and now you are again subtracting one RT from this, then what will happen is this is 0 slope, so 0 minus 1, so it's again, the slope will become negative. So now once the slope becomes negative, what will happen is this particular thing will not be there, and your line will become like this, and this particular thing is gone. So your new line is like this, and the value of this is minus 1. Now you see the the thing that we wanted was this. That is, there should be no signal after 1. So but here we are having this particular thing going on, right? So we have to remove this so that uh, this signal should not be there. So how to do that? That can be done by adding, you see here, by adding r of t minus 1. So if you add r of t minus 1 here, then what will happen? It is like a signal which is in this way. So your r of t plus 1 is r of t plus 1 is like this, having a slope of 1 starting at 1. So when you do that, when you add this to this signal here, which is r of t plus 1 having a slope of 1, then this one and this minus 1 will cancel out because of two opposite, straight line segments which are having a slope of 1 and minus 1. When you add these two together, they both will nullify each effect, and once that is done, the final signal that you will get after adding these things will be this. and this happens because of the nulling effect of this one and this one. So let's remove this and this also. So once you have added all these three terms, what you get now is this term, this particular triangle function. So any questions here related to this explanation you can ask. So this way you can see how you have represented a triangle function in terms of the ramp function. And the important thing is you can further decompose it. You can further bring it one level down. This can be brought down to one level down on unit step, and this can be brought down onto the delta function. So you can express this this triangle function in terms of the delta functions also. If you want that, you can express it in terms of the integrals, and we know how to do it in our earlier discussion. So you can decompose it to the multiple blocks down. So in this way you can see how a complex function can be represented in terms of the basic building blocks, which is basically unit step and delta function. On top of it you can make other complex functions. For example, here we have this triangle and even the pulse function that we had discussed. So all of them are actually some sort of complex functions which are built on unit step and delta functions. But since we can use these functions also to develop other complex functions, so that's why we are using these functions also as the basic building blocks along with the unit step and delta function. So this finishes off with the thing. Now we are moving towards the next part of the topic, which is the impulse decomposition of the continuous time signals. Impulse decomposition for continuous time signals. So what we are doing is we are actually, if you observe this, this is basically the shifting property that we were having. This one, this was a shifting property that we are using here. Now what we are doing, we are actually integrating on this variable lambda for all the range moving from minus infinity to infinity. So what we are getting when we do that, that is what we are doing. We are integrating from minus infinity to infinity all the parameters lambda here. So when we do that, what we are getting is the signal back, which is xt. So let us see how we are getting the signal xt back when we integrate the shifting property of the impulse function from all the range of lambda moving from minus infinity to infinity. So in order to prove this particular expression, so what we will do is we will see this figure here. So if you observe, we have this figure which has various components. The first component is the original signal xt, which we are trying to which we are trying to come up with, because here you can see we want xt to be out. So what we are trying to do is we are trying to formulate and we are trying to prove this expression that this will give you xt. So our original signal is xt, which is given by this line. This is our original signal. And now what we are doing, we are actually approximating it with delta functions. So that delta function approximation and that function which we are approximating using delta functions are x tilde. So you can see we have x hat here. So x hat is nothing but these signals. This is basically your x hat. So we are trying to approximate this original signal using x hat t, and these all are actually the impulse function. These are basically the pulse functions, which we will see how it will turn out to be the impulse function, but these are all rectangular functions that we are using. So let us see how we can prove the theorem, prove the expression which is given above. So here what we want to do, we want to actually approximate xt using x tilde x hat t, using the series of rectangular pulses which we have already discussed, and they are all delta wide. You can see they are all delta apart. Shifted pulses with delta width. Each rectangular pulse is centered around the time instant and delta. So you observe they are all centered around time instants and delta. So at 2 delta you will have you will have this point, at 3 delta you have this point, at 4 delta you have this point. So the heights of the rectangles are basically adjusted in such a way that the amplitude of the signal xt lies at the midpoint of the rectangle. So here you see the original signal amplitude lies at the midpoint of the rectangle here, and that coincides with the time instant, which is delta, 2 delta, 3 delta, 4 delta, 5 delta. So this is basically the diagram and the explanation of it. And what we will be doing is, our objective is to, first of all develop this x tilde t and see how this will move to xt. So if you want to do the approximation of xt, then how you can do it? You can do it by writing this expression. This expression is very simple. So what you are doing is you are writing it in terms of the rectangular functions, which we have already pointed out can be written as a function as this variable pi, and you know that all these rectangular pulses are shifted by the integer multiple of delta. So you can write this expression as t minus t naught. So here t naught will be n delta, and your n variable is running from minus infinity to infinity, because you can see that delta is moving from negative infinity to positive infinity. So now even you can see this factor. This factor is an amplitude factor which is scaling this pulse, and scaling factor is x n delta. And why it is x n delta? Because we told that the amplitude of this is basically lying on the n delta step. So, and that is basically your uh, the original signal having the amplitude at n delta. So that's why it is scaled by n delta here. So now once you have this, what you can do now is you can apply some tricks. So here what we will be doing is we are multiplying by delta and dividing it by delta. So we are multiplying it by delta and dividing it by delta. And note that we have delta at this side also, because it's a generalized rectangular pulse with minus delta by 2 and delta by 2. And it's not 1 by 2 and minus 1 by 2. So it's a generalized pulse case. You can recall our earlier lecture where we had a generalized expression for it. So that's why delta will be here at the bottom. So now the trick is you apply 1 by delta and you multiply it by delta. So this term which is over here, you call it as a pulse function. So this is basically p and t, which we are replacing it by this thing. And you can see now that this rectangular pulse is having a width of delta, as you already know, and height is 1 by delta. So it's centered around n delta, and the area is actually, it's independent of the value of delta, because the width is delta and the height is 1 by delta. So the pulse width is independent of delta. So now once you define p and t as this thing, you can substitute this value here. You can substitute p and t in this expression. So what you get here is x tilde t, which you are trying, x hat t, which you are trying to approximate, so towards the xt. Then what you can do is you can write it as this. So this is the extra factor which we are writing in replacement of this factor. So once you have this now, so what you observe is that as you move your delta towards 0, so as you are making the pulses go towards 0, you make it thin and thin. Then what happens is, in the limit when your delta tends towards 0, what happens is this expression which is over here will become a impulse function. So as your delta moves towards 0, the expression which is given over here becomes impulse function. So if that is the case, what you can do is you can write xt as limit of delta tending towards 0 of x hat t, which is the approximate signal, and then you can apply limits on the outer side of this expression here. So as you know, when your delta tends towards 0, your p and t becomes equal to delta t, and your n delta becomes equal to lambda, and your delta becomes equal to d lambda. So it's an incremental strategy where your replacement of these variables is happen. So if this happens now, then what you can see is once you replace all these variables which are given over here by these replacements, then what you will get is you will be getting this expression back, which is the one which we have started out with, this one. So now you can see that how we have represented it in terms of the in terms of how we derived it. So as you can see, this is in particular will be the expression which we have given at the top is particularly will be useful in deriving the convolutional relationships later. So let me show you one simulation here. So that will concrete your visualization for this. Uh, so if you see this expression here, so are you able to see this screen? This one? Okay, so if you see here, this is the original signal, the blue one, which you want to approximate it using the green signal, which is here. So the green signal is like this. You can see it's a discrete signal, and now what we want to do is we want to approximate it using this pulse function, right? So we have this rectangular pulse and we want to approximate it, and now you note we have this delta also. So this delta which is given over here is the horizontal, no, it's a horizontal width of this pulse function. So we will see how we can vary this delta. So if we vary this delta, definitely we will be able to approximate it. This approximated function, we can approximate it to the blue function. So here we have this, this variation which we can do it through this particular sidebar. So let me click it, and if you and now you will see that once we reduce the value of the delta, you can see the green one will become closer to the blue one. So let me do that now, and you see. So as you can see now, I am reducing the value of delta. Earlier it was 1, and now I am reducing it. So as you reduce the value of delta, you can see the pulse widths or pulse heights are increasing. So, and also you can observe that how this green function is coming close to the blue function. You have to only see the horizontal top lines and not the vertical lines in the green expression, in the green figure. So here you see as you decrease the value of delta, you can observe that how your green is becoming close to the blue function. So as this is very fine rectangular pulse which is going towards the impulse function, and currently the value of delta is 0.05 here. So now you can see at this particular location your green function is approximately becoming close to the blue function, and if you reduce it further it will become impulse, and your blue will completely go away and green will sit on top of it. So let me reduce it by one more, 0.04, 0.03. Now you see how fine it is, and your green has, which is the approximated function, becomes exactly equal to the blue one, which is the original signal. Again, see, this is a much finer resolution here, and this is 0.01. So this is the one which actually is a situation where you are tending towards impulse. And here you can see now the complete green, the green approximation completely uh, overlays on the blue signal. So this shows you that how you can represent any signal xt as a running impulse. So this is the one which is a demo for that. So if you have any questions here related to this demo or for this explanation, you can ask. Okay, so if there are no questions here for this, then we will move ahead.
Hello.
Yes.
Sir, like earlier we derived a formula for this, like integral minus infinity to infinity x of lambda into delta into t minus lambda. We had this sir, like for
Okay.
f.
Okay, so what
Uh,
you were saying is earlier you were deriving it, you were getting x of lambda 1, right? Something like this. This is what you were saying, right?
yes,
And then now why it is like this, right? This is what you are saying, right?
yes,
Actually, this one, if you see, is a particular instance of xt. Here you are taking xt, let us say. So for that particular instant, you have this x of t1 actually in the earlier case. But now what you are doing is you are integrating for all the values of t. So when you integrate for all the values of t, what will happen is it is taking into account all the time instants that are present in this particular signal. So that's why once you integrate for all the values of time instants, you will get xt back. That is the thing. Okay?
sir, you mean to say this x of lambda is actually already the integrated version and we're integrating again.
No, no, no. X of lambda is not, x of lambda is the height with which this delta is scaled. It's not the integration. It's the height with which your impulse is scaled. It's an amplitude. But what I am so you are asking about this, right?
Yes,
This is the amplitude with which you are scaling the impulse function. As you can see here, this point here, right? This point is actually x of n lambda, where n is 1 here, so it's an x of lambda. This point is x of 2 lambda. So all these are actually the heights of the pulses which you are actually multiplying with the rectangular pulse. Understood?
yes, yes.
Okay, any other question? Okay, so if there are no questions, then let's move to some other topics. So here we are doing signal classification now. So in this particular topic, we are doing signal classification, and there are multiple ways of doing it. So the first classification that we can do on signals is that whether the signal is a periodic signal or a non-periodic signal. This I think you must be knowing it from your earlier, rerun of this course, or maybe in your schools. So what are periodic functions? A periodic functions GT, not GT here. It will be XT. So a periodic function xt is one with which the following thing will hold true, which is x of t is x of t plus nt. So if you increment the time with t plus nt, where n can be 1, 2, 3. So if you do this for any integer value of n, and where t is the time period of the function, so if xt satisfies this particular thing, then this xt is actually a periodic function. So another point, so what we are trying to say here is that if you have this signal here, if you observe this signal which is of time t naught, so what you are doing is you are incrementing in time step. If you do that by n t0, so here if let us say we take 2 t0, so what will happen is this particular signal will actually move in time by one time step, so it will become like this. So now what they are saying in the definition is, if you increase it by one time step, so the signal that you are getting here should be exactly equal to the signal in your earlier time step. So this signal will be same as this signal if you increment it with one time step or two time steps or three time steps. So if that is the situation, then your signal is periodic. That is what is written over here. So another point of view of this is that if the function is periodic, it is invariant under the time shift. So by saying invariant under the time shift means that the signal will not change. It will remain same. So there is no variation in the signal amplitudes or anything else. So it will remain same if you do a time shift operation on that. So it remains invariant. So this is another point of view for saying that whether the signal is periodic or not. So if you have this signal here, let us say if you have this signal xt, which is given by a cos 2 pi f0 t plus phi, where phi is the phase, f is the frequency, and t is the time instant at which you have this cos function defined. So if you want to prove the periodicity of this function, then how will you do that? You will do it by using, to prove it, you can use this thing. And in this particular thing, what you can do now is you can you can write a cos of 2 pi f0 t, and then you can take first instant of that, that is n is equal to 1, let us say. So it will become a cos 2 pi f0 t plus phi, which you can expand it like this. And if you want this signal on the left to be equal to the signal on the right, what you want is you want this signal to be 2 pi periodic. So you know that. So this one will be equal to 2 pi n. So this will not be n, this should be m here. So let us say it is m, because n we have already taken here, so it will be m. So now as you can see here, so if this is m, so for m is equal to 1, what you can do is you can reduce this to f0t equal to 1. And now what you come up with the definition of time period t for this particular signal, the time period t is inversely related to the frequency, that is t equal to 1 by f0. So using the periodicity, you can prove that the time period of this particular thing is t, which is equal to 1 by f0. So this is actually periodic, as you can see from this thing, because f0t here is equal to either 1 or 2 or 3 or 4, depending upon your instant at which you are looking. So this is in for this particular case. So consider two sinusoidal signals, let us say. So let us say you have first sinusoidal signal, which is x1t, given by this expression. Then you have a second sinusoidal signal, which is given by this, which is x2t. This is x1t, this is x2t. So if you want to determine the condition under which the sum of the signals, which is the sum of these two signals, is also periodic. So you want to see that at which condition it will happen that both the signal summation will be periodic. So what we want to know is to know the periodicity of this signal xt, which is a summation of the two signals. So recall that based on our definition of the periodicity, if we apply on individual x1s, if we apply on individual x1 and x2, so we will get something like this here. That is, this is simple definition of the periodicity. So what we are doing is t plus n1 t1 equal to x1 t, x2 is t plus n2 t2 equal to x2 t. And you know that at the end what we got was this expression here, or basically this expression, where we are taking it as m, but here I am just going it by n convention. So if you see here, right now we are taking m as 1. So this will be what you will get from the first, and this one is the one which you will get from the second. So now what we want to do is we want to do the check on periodicity on xt, which is the summation of the two. So what you can do is you can write xt as the original signal which we had earlier, and for replacing it by t plus t naught for xt, in the summation part you can get this. So if you want to prove the periodicity, then what you want is you want to see that you can use a and b, you can use a and b with c, you can use a and b with c to reach the conclusion for d. So here you have this d, right? So you want this to be periodic. So if you want this to be periodic here, then what you can do is you can conclude from this and this here individually that the periodicity value, that is t0 here, will be actually equal to n1 t1. If you compare this with this, what you get is t0 will be equal to n1 t1 and t0 will be equal to n2 t2. So if this is the situation, then what you can say is that the signal will be periodic. The combined signal, the summation signal will be periodic with value of T0, which is equal to N1 T1, or it is equal to N2 T2. So you can replace it in terms of the frequencies also. So if you replace in terms of the frequencies, you will get something like this. And then from here you can conclude that the frequency f1 of the signal, the first signal, should be a integer multiple of the fundamental frequency f0 of the combined signal xt. And similarly f2 has to be an integer multiple of the fundamental signal f0, which is fundamental frequency f0 of the some combined signal xt. So this is what you get, you know, from the derivation of this. If you want to combine the signals, then the fundamental frequency or the time period of the combined signal is f0, or time period is t0, and the individual f1 and f2 will be defined like this. So now what happens is, from here we can conclude that the combined signal xt is periodic provided the all frequencies of all its components. So this is important, that signal xt, which is a combined signal, it will be periodic provided that all the frequencies which are present in all its components, that is component x1 and x2, are integer multiples of the fundamental frequency which we have already derived here for two signals. So you can see here fp will be equal to np f0, and f0 is the fundamental frequency, and your np is running where p is running from 1, 2, 3 till you want. So if you want more signals to be added, so that p value will be 3 here for the 3 signals, and continuously if you want to add more signals, the main fundamental concept will be this. So in order to concretely understand what's going on here for doing this summation, let's do one example. So let us say if you want to prove the periodicity of the following signal xt here, where signal xt is defined by this. So you can easily see that your f1 is 1.5 hertz. There is no uh, explanation required in this particular setting, because you already know that f1 will be 1.5 hertz, your f2 will be 2.5 hertz. So once you have this, what you can do is you can make use of this thing. You can make use of this expressions. So if you make use of these expressions here, like I'm quite particularly focusing on this. So what we can do is we can write n1 by f1 equal to n2 by f2, and then f2 by f1 can be written as n2 by n1. It's as simple as that. You are cross multiplying, and then you are writing the values of f2 and f1 which you got. So it's 2.5 divided by 1.5. So what you get at the end is your n2 is 5 and your n1 is 3. So this is the ratio of the n's that you are getting. And you know that we have already seen that the individual components of x1 and x2 are related to f0 by the multipliers n1 and n2. So you got n1 and n2 as 3 and 5. So what is the value of n1? You got n1 as 3, so you can replace it here. So it's 3f0. For f2 what you are getting is 5f0. So you can see the first signal x1 having frequency f1 is 3 times f0, and f0 is the fundamental frequency, and f2 is basically 5 times f0. And you already know that f1 value is 1.5 here, and for this f2 you know it's 2.5. So from either of them what you get is the fundamental frequency of 0.5 hertz for the combined signal, which you are actually adding the two together. So the fundamental frequency is 0.5 hertz and the time period is 2 seconds. So what it says is that in one period of xt, means when you are adding the two signals together, so that signal xt which we are saying, so that signal xt is having a time period of 2 seconds. So if you see this plot here, this time period is 2 seconds. This is a 2-second time period. So let me draw it with different color here. So this time period is 2 seconds. So as you can see on the plot, so when you say that your f1 is actually 3 times f0 and f2 is actually 5 times f0, what it means is you are actually taking f1 3 times. You know, there will be 3 cycles of f1 and there will be 5 cycles of f2. That is what it is saying here, that if your f1 is 3 f0 and f2 is 5 f0. So once you simulate it on MATLAB or Python, you can easily understand that you can easily observe that at a 2 second interval, your x1t, which is shown by pink line, will will be will be finishing off will be finished in 3 cycles. You can see this cycle is first, this cycle is second, and this cycle is third. So the pink one is actually uh, uh, it's actually completed in 3 cycles, whereas the blue one which is over here, it is completed in 5 cycles. So you can see here, this is the first cycle completed, then again you have a second cycle, then you have third cycle, then you have fourth cycle, then you have fifth cycle. So you can see how these are related and interpretation is simple. So any questions here related to this? Okay. So now let us say if you have this signal here, which is xt, which is given by this, that is 2 pi 1.5t plus sine 2 pi 2.75t. So can you solve it? I'll give you 5 minutes on this and tell me what will be the fundamental frequency of this combined signal and the corresponding individual n1 and n2 for this. Okay, so now if you see here, this is the question that we have. Here we have, assigned 2 pi 1.5t and 2.75t. So here you can see f1 is 1.5, f2 is 2.75. Then again you use this particular thing which we started off with, and from here you can see the ratio of f2 and f1 will be this, which is 11 by 6. And from here, now what you can do is you can write f1 as n1 f0. So here you can see from n1 is equal to 6, n2 is equal to 11. So when you put f1 as 6 f0 and 6 f0 is equal to 1.5, as you can see over here. So from here you can get the fundamental frequency of the combined signal, which is 0.25. So so the fundamental frequency is 0.25 hertz, from where you can get the fundamental time period as 4 seconds, and f1 is basically completing 6 cycles in this particular f0 for this particular frequency of 0.25 in the combined signal, and f2 is finishing off 11 cycles in this. So you can see this in the figure also, as it becomes very complex, but you can see that the time period is 4 seconds. So this time period here is 4 seconds, and now you can closely look on to the individual signals, and then you can understand that each of these signals are actually finishing off with 6 and 11 cycles. So this one is finishing off with 6 cycles, this one is finishing off with 11 cycles. So you can check yourself that that is indeed true. Okay, so there is one more question for you people. Can you solve for this? Like if you have this signal here, can you tell me the periodicity of xt now? Again, 2 minutes on this, 2 or 3 minutes, and then let me know the periodicity of this signal xt. If you see here, we have this signal. So if you do the analysis as discussed, what you will get is the ratio of the two factors n2 and n1 will be 3 over 2 pi. It's a irrational function, and you see that pi value is not it has a value of 3.14 and it keeps on going. So the thing is, because of this pi factor, xt is aperiodic, as it does not repeat at finite time. So there is a problem here because of the irrationality of this function, this fraction. So this is not a this is an irrational function because of this factor pi. So what happens is this combined signal xt is not periodic at all in this situation. So this concludes the uh, topic of periodic and non-periodic. In the next section or in the next lecture, we will discuss energy signals and power signals. So we will do that in our next class. So if you have any questions, we have 2 minutes. Otherwise, we will close this class now.
Sir, can you share the tutorial sheet before?
Okay, okay. I will share it. Like, how much time you want, like, for that?
Just to overview the questions.
Yeah, that one will be done like 4 5 minutes before that. Don't worry. Okay. Okay. So today there will be a tutorial class from 3 to 4, and you can use that same Google Meet link to join. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.